Many films are designed to be thrilling to audiences, with car chases, boat chases, and regular old chases. But horror films are meant to be frightening. Whether or not an individual viewer is frightened is another matter. Today's rather late video essay is on the subject of desensitization, as it applies to the many frightening facets of horror. Desensitization is a reduced reaction to certain stimuli, often as a result of repeated exposure. This is not quite the same thing as coming to anticipate jump scares, which becomes easier than ever these days, when they're preceded by eerie silence. It's taking less time to recover from ideologically disturbing or gory and violent material. This tends to be something that longtime fans of horror movies can identify with. I say movies because it is, after all, a visual medium. Reading a horror story can lead you to imagine horrific monsters and splattery demises, but watching it in a film is a lot harder to shake off in many ways. Your brain saw it, and depending on the tone of the film, is more likely to believe it really happened. And to make matters worse, many horror movies tout themselves as being based on true events. This can make the events contained therein seem far more credible and real. Leaving aside for a moment that these based on a true story things often involve a lot of creative license, it can be particularly effective for more realistic horror movies. Open Water is a horror movie about being stranded in shark-infested waters, which could feasibly happen to an unlucky tourist. The Girl Next Door is based on the abuse and death of a real girl, Sylvia Likens. The Strangers is supposedly based on the director's personal encounter with a group of home invaders, although he turned it up from burglary to full-on slaughter. There's a commonly held belief that desensitization can make people more violent or less bothered by real-life violence. This won't be the focus of my video, but I'd say it can be true to a small degree. I've known at least one horror fan who, I'm surprised, is not a serial killer, although most of the people I've encountered in my horror community have been lovely people. There have been some studies on all this, with mixed results. What I'm interested to know is A, is desensitization something to be desired? And B, what are some ways to desensitize and possibly resensitize oneself to horror? I think horror is meant to be indulgent in a way. Many of the scares you'd encounter in a typical horror movie have nothing to do with real life. Alien invasions, haunted houses, diseases that turn your body into scrap metal, but audiences still relate to the characters involved because nobody likes being in a helpless situation. I mentioned this before in my 1-hour photo review, but depending on the subgenre, horror movie protagonists usually have some agency in the narrative and make unwise decisions that put them in the path of danger. This is the folly of man. We all make mistakes and none of us are infallible. Even in movies where the monster or slasher killer appears to happen to the protagonists, it's up to them to make their escape. But once you've seen 100 or so horror movies, you begin to recognize the pattern of encountering and running from a threat, and you see the same old kills and spills. Personally, I can only be scared by a horror movie under certain conditions. I prefer them to be suspenseful rather than merely ghastly, although there are exceptions, and I prefer them to have to do with my particular phobias and hang-ups. It seems I'm not alone. Many people feel an increasing numbness when it comes to horror, and yearn to feel the same fear and revulsion that they once did. So how does desensitization happen? Well, that all depends. There are a couple of ways. The most common blanket approach to desensitization is repeated exposure, resulting in less fear. As I've said before, longtime horror fans almost always experience this. There's a term in psychology called flooding or exposure therapy, which is used to treat phobias. Let's just say, like me, you have an irrational fear of crane flies. Your therapy might go as follows. First you look at pictures of them, then video, then maybe you trap one under a glass and look at that, then maybe you press the glass against your palm and let it buzz around and realize it doesn't want to hurt you. How far you go with it is up to you. Maybe the last step is walking through some long grass and letting a bunch of them tap around your bare legs. Or not. Now, this kind of therapy can work very well if it's done gradually and not sprung on someone to overwhelm them. Looking at you, Maury.
Oh my God! Look at it! Get away from me!
Horror movies may be one way to approach a particular fear, as whatever it is remains safely in the realm of fiction. Haunted houses, swamp monsters, and hyper-aggressive birds cannot leap through the screen and attack us directly. In one online presentation I found, Claire Southwell says that horror movies are a way for people to test their fear limits from the safety of their own homes. However, many horror movies could still exacerbate existing phobias by exaggerating the supposed threat. The film Eight-Legged Freaks ain't helping anybody with a fear of spiders, for example. Other approaches to desensitization do exist. As corny as it sounds, bearing in mind that it is indeed only a movie can help. The more tenuous the link to real-life situations, the lesser the fear. This is why it's especially important to be questioning of based on true events horror, especially if the film is based on the supernatural or the extraterrestrial. I'm a skeptic, in case you couldn't tell, but that's another video. Watching with a friend can bring more comfort than if you are alone with the movie. Reading a synopsis of the film, even including spoilers, can help prepare you for what is to come. Some people have even found hypnosis to be helpful with conquering their fears. But Emily, some of you might be saying, it's not that I'm scared, I just can't handle all the blood and viscera. And you're right, this is slightly different from what I've been talking about. Squeamishness is a pretty natural human response. Few of us are very comfortable with gore, especially in real life, and even if you get past the ideologically upsetting aspects of a film, you may still feel sick to your stomach. This is, first of all, nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, reacting strongly to gore and violence shows empathy. There are still a few ways around it. Slow and gradual exposure continues to work well here. This is how it works with medical students, who over time can build up a resistance to even the most spectacular injuries and medical procedures. Ingesting sugar and staying hydrated can help to prevent or lessen the symptoms of squeamishness, such as lowered blood pressure and lightheadedness. You may also become less squeamish if you've personally experienced some sort of physical injury. This has been found in, for example, women who have given birth. But there is one tactic I've found which is useful for decreasing fear and nausea brought about by sickening imagery. What I like to do is approach the film from a place of curiosity, either the science side or the makeup and special effects side. It can be fascinating to learn how certain scenes were filmed. The werewolf transformation scene in An American Werewolf in London is impressive for its effects, and the fact that it was filmed in unforgiving bright light. John Carpenter's The Thing uses an astounding blend of effects, including puppetry, stop-motion animation, animatronics, and CGI. One of the victims in Return of the Living Dead experiences blood settling in the lower portion of the body, one of the 4 stages of death, which is fantastic attention to detail. Martyrs, my next film for review, shows a character with flayed skin, and I'm fascinated to know how they did it. Remember that film is an art form, and each one is the result of dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of people pulling together. Writers, producers, directors, cinematographers, creative consultants, cameramen and women, makeup and special effects artists, cinematographers. With time, you can learn to appreciate all the effort that goes into producing that fear you feel. Now I have some tips for those of you who wish to resensitize yourselves. With no guarantees this will work. If you want to skip over this part, then just go to the timecode shown. Now, you've probably tried the usual steps. Turning off the lights, turning up the volume, watching alone. But after a while, the aggregation of all the horror movies you've seen will dull you to the new. Here are a few things I recommend. First of all, it can help to take a long break from horror. In the same way that it helps to leave your first draft novel alone for a while before rewriting it, going on a horror fast, so to speak, will allow you to approach it with fresh eyes. If it helps you to compare your films to real-life events, then do it. Indulge in urban legends from your town. Allow yourself to think that home invasion is possible, or that your next doctor could be an angel of death. Try to empathize with the main characters of these films and identify with the fear and helplessness they feel. Try putting yourself in their shoes. When you're in a state of duress, do you approach dangerous situations with cold, steely logic, or do you break down emotionally? We all have different reactions to trauma. It may be worth branching out into experimental or extreme horror. Seek out the epitome of disturbing cinema and gore porn. Also consider watching more foreign language cinema, as other nations' approach to filmmaking can be quite different and therefore unsettling. East Asian horror can be surreal at times and invoke different breeds of monsters and spirits. New French extremism is unforgiving and uses extreme violence to drive the message home. If you're interested, I recommend the YouTube channel Horrible Reviews, which has a series of the most disturbing movies ever. A lot of these are obscure world cinema, so you may find some hidden gems. For obvious reasons though, I don't recommend seeking out real-life atrocities that happen to have been caught on video. Even if you think you have a strong stomach for it, you will not find any joy in the pained and dying screams of real people. And if you do, well, I'm worried about you. And for the people who skipped ahead, I'm just going to start talking about how the government isn't doing anything about killer washing machines. It's a nightmare! This just about wraps up my video, so let me know about your own experiences and journeys through horror. Are there any movies that used to, or still do, make you feel faint? What are some strategies that work for you? I'd be very interested to know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video essay, and I'll see you soon.